May 23rd, 1918. New Orleans. Just past midnight, in a small grocery on the corner of Upper Line and Magnolia Streets, someone kneels quietly at the back door and works a chisel into the wood. Prying a single panel loose, silent enough not to wake the couple sleeping inside, Joseph and Catherine Maggio never heard him come in. By morning, they're both dead, struck with their own axe, left in a room that makes no sense to the men who find them. No forced front door, no robbery, no clear motive, just a small deliberate hole where a door panel used to be. It's the first of at least 6 confirmed murders. Some estimates run much higher. Across the next 17 months, a killer the newspapers will nickname the Axeman, who will write New Orleans a letter promising to spare anyone playing jazz music on a specific night, and who will vanish so completely that, over a century later, we still don't know his name. Welcome to Bone and Crown. We're not here for the legend. We're here for the case file. And this one has more open questions in it than almost anything we've covered. Quick warning before we start. This case involves real violence against real families, including a child. We're not going to dwell on details the evidence doesn't require, but we're also not going to soften a story that a whole city lived through in genuine terror. Bone and Crown exists for exactly this kind of case. The ones where the mystery never got a tidy ending. So let's go back to New Orleans, 1918, and follow the axe. To understand why New Orleans reacted to this case the way it did, you have to understand what kind of year 1918 already was before the Maggios were killed. America was at war. Newspapers ran daily headlines about German spies hiding in ordinary American neighborhoods, and suspicion toward immigrant communities, German, Italian, anyone who sounded foreign enough, was already running high. Just months earlier, the city had shut down Storyville, its famous red light and entertainment district, scattering the jazz musicians who'd built their careers there into halls and house parties across town. Jazz itself was still a fairly new, faintly disreputable sound to a lot of respectable New Orleans society, associated fairly or not with the same neighborhoods the city had just tried to clean up. And New Orleans had a large, close-knit Italian immigrant community, many of them grocers, small family businesses that were, at the time, an easy target for a very real, very organized threat. Extortion gangs preying specifically on Italian shop owners, threatening violence unless the owners paid up. It was a common enough danger that when the first axe murder happened, plenty of people in New Orleans assumed, reasonably, that it was simply gang violence dressed up as something stranger. It's worth adding one more layer here, because it matters for how seriously police took this case at first. Newspapers would later dig up reports of similar axe attacks going back as far as 1911. An Italian couple named Sciambra shot and attacked in their home, among others, and retroactively folded them into the Axeman legend as early attacks. Modern researchers are considerably more skeptical of that connection than the 1919 press was. The earlier cases involved different weapons, different methods of entry, and, in at least one instance, an actual named suspect police already had reason to investigate. It's a useful early lesson for this whole case. The more dramatic version of the story kept absorbing loosely related crimes and separating what genuinely belongs to this killer from what got attached to him later is most of the work. They'd turn out to be wrong about the gang theory too. Or at least, not entirely right. As you're about to see, that ambiguity never really goes away. And it's a big part of why this case has stuck around in the public imagination for over 100 years instead of fading the way most unsolved crimes from 1918 quietly have. Joseph Maggio was an Italian grocer. His wife Catherine kept the books. They lived modestly, worked constantly, and by every account, had no enemies anyone could name. On the night of May 22nd into May 23rd, 1918, someone chiseled a panel out of their back door, entered the house, and attacked them both with a straight razor, and then their own axe, left behind at the scene. Joseph's brother, Andrew Maggio, a barber by trade, discovered the bodies and alerted police, later telling investigators he'd heard groaning through the shared wall between their homes and gone to check. Investigators noticed something odd almost immediately. The razor used in the attack appeared to be one Andrew had recently brought home from his own barbershop for sharpening. For a while, he was the obvious suspect, family member, plausible opportunity, a weapon traced back to his own shop, and the first person on the scene, which is exactly the kind of detail that makes any investigator suspicious. But there was no motive investigators could substantiate, no other evidence tying him to the scene, and Andrew was eventually cleared. The case went cold within weeks. One grieving brother, one unsolved double murder, and a city that for the moment had no reason to think it was anything more than an isolated tragedy. It wouldn't stay quiet for long. On June 27, 1918, grocer Louis Bessemer and a woman named Anna Lowe, described in most records as his mistress, were both attacked in the same way. Axe, same missing door panel, same signature. Bessemer survived a fractured skull. Lowe lingered for weeks before dying in early August. Here's where the case takes its first genuinely strange turn. Before she died, Lowe changed her story, at one point implicating Bessemer himself, alleging he was secretly a German spy and that he had attacked her. In wartime New Orleans, an accusation like that didn't need much evidence to spread. Investigators searched the house and reportedly found letters written in both Russian and Yiddish, languages Bessemer happened to speak, which only fed the espionage theory further, even though neither language had anything to do with Germany at all. Bessemer was arrested and charged with murder. He was tried and eventually acquitted, but not before spending months in custody for a crime that, if the pattern holds, was almost certainly committed by the same person who'd already killed the Maggios. It's the second time in this case, and nowhere near the last, that fear and wartime suspicion did more to shape the investigation than any actual evidence did. Then, on August 5th, a pregnant woman named Mrs. Schneider woke to a man standing over her bed, striking her repeatedly before fleeing. She survived a brutal beating, gave birth safely days later, and could recall almost nothing about her attacker beyond his silhouette in the dark. 5 days after that, on August 10th, an elderly grocer named Joseph Romano was fatally struck in his home. His nieces, Pauline and Mary, ran in during the attack and caught a real look at the man fleeing. The only eyewitness description that exists in the entire case. They described him as large, dark-complexioned, wearing a dark suit and a black slouch hat. It's not much, but it's more than investigators would ever get again. And in a case with almost no physical description at all, that one glimpse from two frightened teenagers became the closest thing New Orleans ever had to knowing what its own Axeman actually looked like. After the Romano murder, New Orleans effectively armed itself. Men sat up nightly guarding their families. Axes disappeared from back porches all over the city, locked away out of fear they'd be used against their own owners. Extra police patrols went up. Newspapers ran panicked updates almost daily, and it wasn't unusual for a barking dog or shifting shadow to bring half a street out onto their porches with lanterns and shotguns. The city brought in private detectives to supplement an overwhelmed police force, offered cash rewards for information, and fielded a flood of tips that mostly led nowhere. neighbors accusing neighbors, at least one false confession from a man later found to have been nowhere near any of the crime scenes, and dozens of suspicious characters detained and released within days for lack of any real evidence. And then, nothing. No attacks for nearly 7 months, long enough that the panic actually started to fade, long enough for people to tell themselves, cautiously, that maybe it was finally over, that whoever it was had moved on, or been scared off, or simply stopped. It wasn't. On March 10th, 1919, in the town of Gretna, just across the river from New Orleans, grocer Charles Cordemelia and his wife Rosie were attacked in their home. Rosie later said she woke to find her husband already struggling with a large man wielding an axe. When Charles fell, the attacker turned on her as she held their 2-year-old daughter, Mary, and begged for both their lives. He killed the child anyway. Charles and Rosie both survived, badly wounded. In the chaos afterward, Rosie did something that would derail the investigation for weeks. She accused their neighbor, a fellow Italian grocer named Orlando Giordano, and his teenage son, of being the attackers. It made no sense on its face. The Giordanos had no apparent motive, and the physical evidence didn't remotely fit 2 familiar neighbors, one of whom was the very man who'd run across the street to help when he heard the screaming. But a traumatized eyewitness accusation is a powerful thing, and both Giordanos were arrested and charged, facing what was, at the time, a potential death sentence. Rosie would later retract the accusation completely, admitting she'd never actually seen her attacker's face clearly enough to identify anyone. By then, real damage had already been done to 2 innocent men's lives. One more name added to the long list of people this case wrongly implicated before the true culprit was ever found. What makes this worse is that it very nearly went further than an arrest. The Giordanos actually stood trial and were initially convicted based largely on Rosie's identification. The father sentenced to hang, the teenage son to life in prison before an appeal, and Rosie's eventual retraction unraveled the case against them entirely, and both men were freed. A city desperate for an arrest had come within a signed verdict of executing an innocent man for a murder he had nothing to do with, purely on the word of a traumatized witness who never actually saw a face. On March 13, 1919, the Times-Picayune published a letter addressed to the people of New Orleans, allegedly written by the killer himself. It's a genuinely bizarre document, addressed to esteemed mortals and signed off from hell itself. The author claims to be, in his own words, a demon from hell rather than a human being, taunting the police as hopeless, boasting that he'd never be caught and had never even been truly seen. And then comes the part everyone still remembers a century later. He announces he'll strike again at 15 minutes past midnight on March 19th, but promises, with what the letter calls infinite mercy, to spare anyone in a house where a jazz band is playing at that exact moment. It reads today like something written for effect, theatrical, almost gleefully over the top, clearly aware that a demon from hell voice would spread faster and further than a plain threat ever could. Whether you take the letter at face value or not, New Orleans took no chances. On the night of March 19th, the city was, by every account, deafening. Dance halls filled past capacity. Amateur bands set up in living rooms. Professional musicians who'd normally be paid to perform played for free, block after block, purely out of self-preservation. Nobody was attacked that night, which either means the letter was completely genuine, or it means someone else entirely had a reason to want New Orleans playing jazz that particular evening. Here's the detail most retellings of this story leave out. And it's exactly the kind of thing Bone and Crown exists to dig up. A local musician named Joseph John Davila composed a novelty song called The Axeman's Jazz that same night, reportedly finishing it at around 2 in the morning. Once he was confident, the Axeman had no personal interest in him. The sheet music, featuring a cartoon that had run in the Times-Picayune the day before, sold well across the city in the following weeks, turning a night of citywide terror into a modest commercial hit almost before the sun came up. Some researchers, including author Miriam C. Davis in her modern investigation of the case, have pointed to the timing as more than a little suspicious. A conveniently timed panic. A song ready to publish and profit from almost the instant that panic peaked. It's entirely plausible the letter itself, or at least the citywide jazz spectacle it produced, was less a genuine communication from a killer and more a piece of opportunistic theater dressed up in a demon's voice for maximum effect by someone who understood exactly how a frightened, superstitious city would respond to it. We can't prove that with total certainty. Nobody ever confessed to writing it, and the Times-Picayune never revealed how the letter reached them. What we can say is this: it wouldn't be the first time in this case, or in true crime generally, that someone else profited from a killer's reputation, while the actual killer, whoever he was, got away completely clean. Quick pause here, because the case is about to take its darkest turn yet. If this is your first time at Bone and Crown, this is what we do every week. Take a true crime or dark history case and dig past the legend for what the actual evidence supports. If you want more of that, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep going. All right, back to New Orleans. The attacks resumed later that year. On August 10th, 1919, grocer Steve Boca survived a brutal axe attack in his own bed, but remembered almost nothing afterward beyond waking up already bleeding. No memory of a door opening, no memory of a face, nothing but the injury itself and a missing panel in his back door. The killer's signature, by now unmistakable. Weeks later, on September 3rd, a young woman named Sarah Lullman was attacked in her bed and survived with similarly fragmented memories, found unconscious with a tooth knocked loose and no recollection of what had happened to her. That gap in memory shows up again and again in this case, and it's worth sitting with for a second. Several surviving victims describe waking up mid-attack, or not at all, with no coherent account of their assailant's face, size, or method of entry beyond what investigators reconstructed afterward from the physical scene. It's part of why, even with real physical evidence at nearly every location, this case never produced a single description reliable enough to put out to the public with any confidence. Then on October 27th, 1919, came the most violent attack of the entire case. Mike Pepitone, another Italian grocer, was killed in his bed, struck so many times with such force that his skull was almost unrecognizable by the time investigators arrived. His wife, Esther, woke to the sound of the attack and glimpsed what she later described as 2 men fleeing through the house, past the couple's own sleeping children, and out into the night. 2 men, not one. It's a detail that complicates everything about the tidy, single-killer version of this story. And it's the last confirmed attack the Axeman of New Orleans was ever connected to. After Pepitone's murder, the killings simply stopped. No explanation, no arrest, no confession, just silence where 17 months of terror had been. For 2 years, that silence held. Esther Pepitone eventually moved on with her life, remarrying a man named Angelo Albano and relocating to Los Angeles, far from the city where her husband had died. Then in late 1921, right around the second anniversary of her first husband's murder, Angelo Albano disappeared without explanation. Weeks later, on a busy Los Angeles street, a woman in black stepped out of a doorway and shot a man named Joseph Mumfre, sometimes recorded as Monfray, Manfray, or half a dozen other spellings, multiple times with 2 separate revolvers, killing him where he stood. She made no attempt to run. At the police station, she eventually identified herself Esther Pepitone, now Esther Albano, the widow of Mike Pepitone, the Axeman's last known victim. Her explanation was extraordinary. She alleged that Mumfray had come to her home demanding money and jewelry, threatening to kill her exactly as he'd killed her first husband if she refused. She claimed she recognized him as the very man she'd glimpsed fleeing her bedroom the night Mike Pepitone died, 2 years and thousands of miles away. It's an almost unbelievably tidy ending to an untidy case, and police investigating Mumfrey's background found real, if circumstantial, reasons to take the theory seriously. He had a documented criminal record, alleged ties to an extortion ring, specifically targeting Italian grocers, and his name, in one of its many spellings, had reportedly come up as a suspect in a similar unsolved axe attack years before the Maggios were ever touched. For decades, this became the accepted ending of the story, retold in book after book. A grieving widow, waiting years for her moment, finally delivering the justice the New Orleans police never could. It's a satisfying way to close out a genuinely disturbing case. It's just not entirely clear it's true. Here's where this case does something most true crime stories don't. Even its resolution turned out to be disputed. Decades later, researchers went looking for the original court records of Esther Albano's arrest and trial for Mumfrey's killing. The paperwork that should exist for any homicide case, however clear-cut the self-defense claim looked. Some investigators, digging through both New Orleans and Los Angeles archives, reported finding no such records at all. No confirmed arrest documentation matching the famous version of events. No trial transcript. Some accounts of the case even give Mumfrey's death 2 different years, which by itself should tell you how shaky the sourcing has been for the century since. That doesn't necessarily mean the shooting never happened. Other researchers have located period newspaper coverage that does substantiate at least the basic outline of the event, including contemporary Los Angeles reporting on a woman named Esther Albano and a man killed under exactly these circumstances. But some modern researchers have worked hard to debunk the neater, more legendary version of this story, the one where justice was finally cleanly served. The tidy version most people know. Justice finally served. The Axeman unmasked by his own final victim's widow. May be more legend than verified fact, repeated by author after author until nobody double-checked the original sources anymore. It's worth remembering, too, that even if every detail of the shooting is accurate, Mumfrey's connection to the actual 1918 and 1919 axe murders was never anything more than circumstantial. A criminal record, a suspicious name, and a widow's identification made in the heat of a threatening confrontation 2 years after the fact. So here's a genuine question for you, and we'd love to hear your theory in the comments. Do you think Joseph Mumfrey really was the Axeman of New Orleans? Or was he just a convenient, already dead man that a grieving, traumatized widow, and then generations of true crime writers after her, needed the story to be true? Strip away the legend, and modern researchers of this case, including Davis, whose book remains the most thorough investigation available, generally speculate along one of a few lines, none of them fully provable. One theory holds that this genuinely was a single perpetrator, likely connected to the extortion rackets already targeting Italian grocers, using the axe murders both as retaliation against those who wouldn't pay and as cover, letting the city's fear of a lone madman obscure what was actually organized criminal violence. Under this theory, the choice of victims, almost entirely Italian grocers, exactly the demographic these extortion gangs preyed on, isn't coincidence. It's the whole explanation. A second theory takes the letter and the jazz night at face value. A genuinely disturbed individual, personally fixated on jazz music for reasons no one will ever fully understand, killing largely at random within one immigrant community he'd decided to target, motivated by something closer to the theatrical menace of the letter itself than by any organized criminal logic. A third, more unsettling possibility is the one Mike Pepitone's murder itself points toward, that this was never one story at all, that some of these attacks were the work of an original unidentified killer, and that others, particularly the later, more brutal ones, and especially an attack with 2 assailants instead of 1, were copycats or entirely separate organized crime violence, all folded together under one convenient nickname because the newspapers and the frightened public needed a single villain rather than a complicated, unsatisfying truth. Every one of these theories is plausible. None of them is proven. And that, honestly, is the most accurate way to describe the entire Axeman of New Orleans case, which is exactly why it's stayed a genuine mystery and not just an unsolved one for over a century. At Bone and Crown, that distinction matters to us. Plenty of cold cases are simply unsolved because nobody kept looking. This one has been looked at repeatedly by serious researchers with real archives to work from, and it's still genuinely unresolved. Here's what we can say with real confidence. At least 6 people were killed between May 1918 and October 1919, with several more seriously wounded, some permanently. No one was ever definitively identified, arrested, and convicted for those murders. The chisel and axe method, the missing door panel, the pattern of Italian grocers targeted, all of it is documented fact. Everything after that, the demon in the letter, the jazz-loving killer Joseph Mumfre, even the shooting that supposedly ended it, sits somewhere between plausible theory and outright legend. Joseph and Catherine Maggio, Anna Lowe, Joseph Romano, Mary Cordemelia, 2 years old, Mike Pepitone. Real people, real families, in a city that spent a year and a half genuinely afraid to sleep with its doors unguarded. New Orleans moved on, the way cities do. The case was never officially closed. It simply stopped generating new evidence to close it with. 100 years later, tour guides in the French Quarter still tell the story most nights of the week, usually with the demon letter and the jazz night as the highlight, and the 8 real names as little more than a footnote before the next stop on the tour. It's worth asking why this particular unsolved case became entertainment so quickly when plenty of equally violent, equally unresolved crimes from the same era were simply forgotten. Part of the answer is almost certainly the letter itself. There's something irresistible about a killer articulate enough and theatrical enough to write New Orleans a taunting note instead of just vanishing quietly. But entertainment value and historical accuracy aren't the same thing, and 100 years of retellings have consistently favored the first over the second. That's exactly the kind of imbalance Bone and Crown exist to correct, one case file at a time. Because a genuinely bizarre letter and a citywide jazz party make for a great story, but they were never actually the point. The point was 8 real people and a killer who was never made to answer for any of it. This is a story with no confirmed killer, no confirmed motive, and no confirmed ending. And maybe that's the most honest note to leave it on. Not every case gets solved. Some of them just eventually stop. That's it for this one. If this is your first time here, welcome to Bone and Crown. We'll be back soon with another story from history's darker corners. Thank you for listening. Before we go, let's slow down on a few words from tonight's episode. Because if part of why you're here at Bone and Crown is to sharpen your English while you get your dark history fix, this next part is built just for you. Today you learned. We use the word alleged constantly tonight, so let's start there. It means claimed or stated without yet being proven true. The alleged Axeman, an alleged German spy, an alleged confession. It's one of the most useful words in true crime because almost nothing in this case was ever actually proven. We also used implicate, a verb meaning to show or suggest that someone is involved in a crime. Anna Lowe implicated Louis B. Sumer before she died, and decades later, circumstantial evidence implicated Joseph Mumfre without ever fully proving his guilt. Closely related is retract, meaning to formally take back a statement you made earlier. Rosie Cordemelia retracted her accusation against the Giordano family once she admitted she'd never clearly seen her attacker's face. Then extortion, a noun for the crime of obtaining something, usually money, through threats or force. Mumfre was allegedly connected to an extortion ring specifically targeting Italian grocers in New Orleans. We used taunting, an adjective for mocking or provoking someone, usually with confidence that you can't be caught. The Axeman's letter was taunting from its very first line, daring the police to catch him. Then substantiate, a verb meaning to provide evidence that proves or supports a claim. Investigators could never substantiate the case against Andrew Maggio. And to this day, nobody has fully substantiated the theory that Mumfre was the killer. We used plausible, an adjective for something reasonable or believable, even without proof. Every theory about this case is plausible. None of them is confirmed. Then debunk, nuance, a verb, meaning to expose a claim or belief as false or exaggerated. Modern researchers have worked hard to debunk the tidier, more legendary version of this story, including the neat ending involving Mumfre. And finally, culprit, a noun for the person actually responsible for a crime. After all of it, the letter, the jazz night, the shooting in Los Angeles. The true culprit behind the Axeman murders was never conclusively identified. 10 words: alleged, implicate, retract, extortion, taunting, substantiate, plausible, debunk, culprit, and speculate from earlier to form a theory without firm evidence. Try using one in a sentence today. And if you have a theory about who the Axeman really was, tell us in the comments below. We genuinely read them. That's it for this one. If this is your first time here, welcome to Bone and Crown. We'll be back soon with another story from history's darker corners. Thank you for listening.